Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Frontline update for the 18th of March 2023. Let's get straight to the front line and indeed straight to our usual starting place at the northeast of Ukraine, Kupiansk to Svatva to Kreminna. Not too much news around here. It seems to be relatively quiet compared to what we're expecting from a potential offensive around particularly the Kupiansk area. They seem to be rather positional there at the moment. Usual repelled attacks around, all of the normal places up and down the line to Kreminna. Defmon says, who's a pro-Ukrainian source, the Ukrainians repulsed attacks in the area of Franikivka, Kreminna, Kuzmina, Verkhovna Kamyanska and Spirna. So that's all the way from the top, very much down to the bottom. So Defmon has in his maps in Kivka under the control of the Russians. No one else seems to have that. Don't know why he's still got that. What he knows that I don't. But anyway, it seems to be how I understand it there. Rebar says on Telegram that in the Kupiansk sector, Russian troops expanded the control zone westward of Franikivka. The Ukrainian command has withdrawn the remaining units to the right bank of the Oskil River to prepare for the defense of Zaporizhzhia. This is something we'd heard previously, so I have got them there anyway in the Franikivka area. There were some claims over the last week that the Ukrainians are contesting Franikivka. I don't know if that's still the case. We shall see. But anyway, that's that for there. We have various claims of sort of repelled attacks in a few areas going down to Kreminna, Chervonopepivka, Makivka, around here. So we go to the ISW, the American military think tank. Another Russian source claimed that Russian forces gained territory along the line and near Chervonopepivka, fighting around Yampolivka, Bilarivka, Neska, Makivka, the Zravka Gully, positional battles there, so on and so forth. If we go back to Rebar, the pro-Russian source, at the Kremlin-Makivka line, Russian assault groups continued to methodically push the enemy out along the entire front line. No real detail about that. I did get a bit of movement on the map westwards from the Russians over the last few days, but I've already done that. I don't know if this is anything particularly new. Ukrainian units lost a few fortified areas west of Ploshchanka in the area of Balka Zuravka, which is the Zuravka Gully, which appears to be around here. You've got two gullies or river. I don't know. River valley's too extensive, but there's some high ground between that, and I think that this is where the Russians are talking about. That's what Rebar's talking about. Somewhere around there, they've claimed a couple of fortified positions, perhaps, or a fortified position, but nothing too significant. And I showed some movement up to the Luhansk Oblast line yesterday, a bit of map redrawing, so that the Russians do have just a couple of fields westward now from where they were, but otherwise really not a lot to report anywhere around here. Dubrova, Serebryansky Forest, Bilarivka, Spirna, lots of repelled attack, not a lot of gain. And Russian sources claim that the Ukrainian forces conducted an unsuccessful ground attack near Chervonopepivka, as the Ukrainians claimed about the Russians. So yeah, much of a muchness in that area. So let's look at Bakhmut already pretty quickly down to there. Repelled attacks around the sort of general areas of there. Indeed, if we go and look at what Defmon says as a kind of summary, there's attacking going on all around in the usual places. Orikovo, Vasilivka, Bakhmut, Ivaniska, Hryhivka, Klishchivka, down the south here as well. So yeah, there is lots of activity. I want to just... where should I go next? I'm going to give you Michael Weiss saying, time for another, albeit shorter thread about Ukraine with insights from Estonian military analyst Carl, compiled by his co-author and himself. This is, I think, a good sort of summary of what's going on in Bakhmut, as according to an analyst. Contrary to the emerging conventional wisdom and media narrative in the West, Carl thinks Ukraine's strategy for holding Bakhmut is the correct one. If Ukraine leaves Bakhmut, the Russians will stop there, will not stop there. Sorry, similar battles will follow in the next place, whether Chasiv or Konstantinivka or Kramatorsk or Sloviansk. After Russia conquered Severodonetsk and Lysychansk in the summer, they were not able to have any serious offensives until January. So it's worth letting them run out of troops and ammunition trying to conquer relatively unimportant towns. Are the Russians culminating? And he says, I don't think it's the culmination of the current Russian attack. If you look at the numbers of daily Russian offensive, it has decreased quite a lot during the last week. Asked about recent, I'm not quite sure what he means by that, but I think it looks like they're culminating. But whether they'll get support from regular Russian troops to mitigate that culmination is another matter. Asked about recent reports of low morale and recriminations among Ukrainian battalion commanders in Bakhmut, Khan answers, quote, the problem with the level of battalion commanders is that they don't have the big picture. I don't see better plans. As said, if they withdraw, then it's just going to be the next town. So this is the idea that actually, and people have said this in my threads earlier, and I've talked about this, is that people might complain on the battlefront about how terrible things are, and of course conditions are terrible. Of course, they never have enough stuff, but actually they don't have an idea of the big picture, that macro view from above, and it might not make sense to them on the front line, but it might make sense to the people pulling the strings, and that might seem unfair. And these troops are being used as sacrifices, but that's the nature of war, and it's horrible. It's just horrible. What about Ukraine losing its most experienced, battle-tested forces in the fight for the city? Quote, I'm not that concerned. They have given relatively good training to a huge number of of soldiers since the start of this phase of the war. That's a huge difference in comparison to Russians. Next question. Will Ukraine hang on to Bakhmut or withdraw soon with the goal of killing as many Russians on their way out as possible? Quote, it depends. If there's no risk of encircling, then they will probably try to hold on. The risk is probably now a little less than it was a week ago. So that is just an interesting little insight. Some people saying they should have pulled out already. Some people less convinced. As far as Andrew Perpetua in mapping is concerned, and this is a 3-day map, so he isn't mapped for 3 days. He's sort of catching up. The gains have been around Zaporizhzhia, which I've reported, and around Orikovo, Vasilivka, which I've also reported, just south of there as well, towards Avdiivka. But actually, no gains since yesterday, and he's got the gains in the north and the south as well. Other mappers don't really have much movement at all over the last 24 hours. Regarding Bakhmut, the front is getting increasingly porous. For both sides, the situation is dynamic. It is like watching water boil. It's very difficult to truly understand what is happening. You may advance in the morning, get beaten back in the afternoon, and return at night. In other words, be skeptical of any claims or gains or captures. This is especially true inside the city itself, where every room and alleyway is being fought for. Anyone can definitively tell you what is going on there. Anyone who does that is lying. No Reports says of yesterday, Bakhmut situation today, that being last night. In the southern part, fighting continues around the MiG-17 monument to the northeast. Russian forces failed to cross the river and retreated. Russian troops have approached the area near the 00506 at Kromova. Heaviest fighting is going on in that area. And they're saying that he's saying, so I'll go to my map actually. So he's saying that heaviest fighting is around this Kromova area as they are looking to move towards this road as it comes in, the 00506 road. So fierce fighting around there. And then he says a failed attempt to cross the river in this northeastern area in here, and the Russians were beaten back across the river. So it does seem like the Russians are being held. The Ukrainians are holding. I was really worried about the southern area, but there was a lot of gains over 48 hours, but then suddenly no movement today or over the last night. Let's go and have over the last 24 hours. Let's go and have a look at what Rebar says. Rebar says, pro-Russian source, northeast of Bakhmut, Russian forces continue storming the enemy's defense in Orikovo, Vasilivka. To hold the front line, the Ukrainians are deploying additional forces to the sector. On the southern outskirts of the city, Wagner squads have liberated most of the Zaporizhzhia district and assault enemy positions at Mariupolska Street. At the same time, Russian forces strengthened in the south of the Vodokanal district. So that'll be around the canal area. They're strengthening it, according to Rebar. However, I don't think this has translated into any map changes. Ukrainians continue to deploy reserves in Chasiv, gathering striking mechanized grouping for decisive counteroffensive. The Wagner PMC's reconnaissance reveals the enemy locations which are being hit by rocket and artillery strikes. interesting. Okay, let's go and look at what War Gonzo, another pro-Russian um, Telegram site says, and of Bakhmut. On the southwestern outskirts of Bakhmut, PMC Wagner reached the highway to Konstantinivka. The Ukrainian garrison is cut off from the main supply line. From the south, Orchestra, which is Wagner, conduct assault operations in the city, and from the north, they advance in the industrial zone. Artillery is working closely along Bakhmut. Musicians attack Chrome. I don't know what Chrome. Oh, that might be Kromova. There is another road to the city. After shelling, they advance at Bogdanivka. In these areas, the armed forces of Ukraine hold positions. Also, Wagner, with fire support, conducts assault operations near Orikovo, Vasilivka. Russian troops attempted to break through to the disputed. Artillery hit the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in Alexandro Shultin, Prechechin, Chazov Yar, Grigorivka. These are all in Russian spelling, so these would be Pravilia, Fedorivka, and Siversk. So basically, they're being hit with artillery all over the shop. The Ukrainian army attacked Ozyarinivka and Kurdyamivka. So what this is to say is that is the Russian sources saying, yeah, they are advancing in the Azov steel area here, still works. The Ukrainians are fighting, pushing back in Kurdyamivka and Ozyarinivka areas. So down south, that's according to War Gonzo, where the Russians have made some gains across the canal over the last 48 hours. But ISW says of all these kind of claims from the Russian sources that actually they haven't really seen any indication. So Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces continued assaults in the southern parts. Wagner reached the T0504 in the south, but ISW has not observed visual confirmation that Wagner forces have interdicted the highway on the southern outskirts. Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut would still be able to access sections of the T0504 highway through country roads between Kromova and Ivaniska, even if the current Russian claims are true. Geolocated footage published on March the 17th indicates that Russian forces secured marginal gains in northern Bakhmut. I'm going to go to that in a second. And Donetsk People's Republic head Denis Pushilin claimed that Russian forces have advanced deeper into the Azov complex, but the ISW has not confirmed that at all. So there are lots of claims going on with advances, but actually no confirmation of those advances. And so everything has stayed pretty much the same. Kromova is difficult towards this road, trying to interdict this road and interdicting the road T0504 highway here in the southern area there. So claims that has been interdicted, but ISW say even if it's been interdicted there, it can still be used here and back further here. So you can kind of use a combination of the roads going into Bakhmut. Anyway, it's interesting that the ISW, and sometimes it's worth checking these claims. So geolocated footage published on March 17th, so yesterday, indicates that Russian forces secured marginal gains in northern Bakhmut. So you might think, okay, marginal gains in northern Bakhmut, let's have a look at what that says. So these are the claims here, which is a geolocation to this point. This is the footnote that ISW are referring to, and that the Ukrainians are attacking this little, I don't know, hut with mortar fire, and it says here, the translation of that tweet is: Bakhmut border guards destroyed the enemy assault group, and with a well-aimed shot at the ammunition cache, they demilitarized the advanced detachment of the Wagner infantry fighting vehicle. So they took that place out. But the ISW is saying that the Russians are here indicates an advancement, a marginal advance in the north of Bakhmut. But then when I go and do a geolocation of that position, it is indeed, quite well behind lines that I've already established were under Russian control really for the last 2 days. So what this tells you is, just be careful, because what they say are marginal gains, that's from where the lines were maybe 3 days ago. Actually, because I've been going on Russian mappers broadly for the gains that the Russians have made, because I think it's somewhat more accurate at the moment. When the Russians are doing well, they like to shout about it, and so Russian mappers seem to reflect that quite well. Although you need to be careful because sometimes they overdo it. But here we have a geolocation that shows Russian gains, but maybe 3 days old, so it's not really gains. So that's why I haven't changed my map at all in the Bakhmut area. Now let's just look at a couple of supporting bits of, I don't know, visual evidence and other stuff to kind of give us a picture of what's going on. The clearer and longer video says OSINT defender of the assault by what is now reported to be the Ukrainian 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade, indeed conducting offensive operations somewhere near Bakhmut, most likely in the southwest near Avdiivka. And here we have, this is quite interesting because there's a good half dozen or so YPR 765s. So these are Dutch versions of the old M113, really APC. Does have a machine gun on top, but there's quite a lot of activity going on here. Not really sure what's happening, but quite a lot of these troops liking to catch us on camera rather than actually do some firing and whatnot. But nevertheless, there is some kind of combined arms activity going on. Now, the fact, sorry, I'm skipping through this. Just, they're going backwards, forwards, attacking, doing different maneuvers. I find it quite interesting that there's so many of these vehicles being involved in one place, which does look more like a counterattack than any kind of defensive move. I also find it interesting that they're using YPR 765s, which is fine. They're quite old. I don't know if this suggests that it'd be great if they had things like Bradleys, of course, in the area. They're not going to use them yet because they're getting them ready for their large counter-offensives. But it does show that they're having to draw on quite old vehicles in order to do this. However, evidently capable enough. But yeah, so this is certainly some form of counterattack in the area, and that would make sense to be south near Avdiivka, for sure. Another point worthy of note is from Defmon here saying all photojournalists were taken from Bakhmut to the city of Strategizhzhia. The reason for this is still unclear. I will not guess, even if a lot of options come to mind. You could be starting to see either one. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Either there's going to be an operation withdrawal. You don't want any photojournalists there. Or two, there's going to be a massive counterattack or a big counterattack or some kind of counterattack that you don't want stuff leaking out, information, photos leaking out of what's going on there either. So it's two ends of the spectrum could be represented by photojournalists being pulled out of Bakhmut to Strategizhzhia. Anyway, that's what's going on. I'm still no clearer as to what the intentions of, well, I guess I am a little bit clearer. They're not pulling out right just yet, it seems. And if they're using vehicles like that, certainly in the south, they are doing some kind of counterattack there. But then the question again is that a counterattack to free up this road so that they can operation withdraw? So if they withdraw, they still need to get people out quickly. So these two roads are still really, really important. So that's why they're possibly fighting hard to hold on to Kromove and fighting hard to give a buffer zone down in the south. So maybe I am still no clearer. That I don't know whether they're going to try and hold on for longer and do some kind of counterattack, or whether they are just ceding ground slowly and making the Russians bleed for as many meters as they can get. So that is what is happening at the moment. It is certainly the case that the Russians have slowed down their advances over that they've seen over the last 48 hours to a week before that. So that's the advances both to the northwest and in and around the city itself. Definitely a better day for the Ukrainians, but of course that's not gains for the Ukrainians. It's just stopping the Russian advances. Okay, so now let's come on further down south and we'll come towards Avdiivka, where there's been a lot of talk about what's going on in the north of Avdiivka, as well as pressure from the south as well. Now, I'm going to show you this video because this is just, I don't know where this has happened, whether this is over a large area, whether it's around Bakhmut, whether it's around Avdiivka in one particular area, I don't know. But special forces of the SBU, called the White Wolves, reportedly destroyed 10 Russian tanks in one night. I don't know whether it's last night, whether the last few nights, one night in the last few nights. Also, one APC was reportedly destroyed. This all happened during a night attack in the Donetsk region. So again, I don't know where this is in Donetsk. So it's around the area that we're talking about now. Why this is important is A, this is a lot of kit that the Russians are losing, and there's visual evidence of this. And B, this is about the utility of thermal imaging for being able to do this stuff at night. This is something we haven't really seen much of in previous months. We haven't seen these IED drone, these IEDs being dropped from drones as active as this at nighttime. So if this is true, it's certainly true. There are 10 vehicles that are caught on camera blowing up at nighttime, and these are Russian vehicles that the Ukrainians are filming. These are Ukrainian cameras showing this. Did it all happen in one night? I don't know that, but I'm going to believe them because I have no reason to disbelieve them, um, or no good reason to disbelieve them. This is a significant issue for the Russians, obviously, for losing this amount of stuff and that they are not safe at night. The question is anything like this happening to the Ukrainians as well? Are there Russian drones that are particularly active at the moment in terms of nighttime activity and thermal imaging? I don't know, but as I say, this is a significant issue for the Russians. They are losing a lot of kit, and yes, the Ukrainians are losing a lot of kit, but the Russians certainly are. I think to a larger degree. Regarding Avdiivka, so getting down to Avdiivka, Andrew Perpetua, again, a 3-day update here from him. Russia is attacking towards Stepova. This is the largest change over the past few days. From what I can tell, still fighting in Kamyanka. I don't see evidence to support Russia's claim to have captured it, but he does seem to agree that the Russians have got Krasnohorivka and have pushed up fully up to the road to the east of Avdiivka. So let's go to look at that on my map. This is to say that this, and I agree with that. There's no pocket of Ukrainian territory to the east of this road that is now under Russian control. The question is how much control over Kamyanka do they have, if any, and what exactly is going on in Krasnohorivka. I think we can probably agree that Krasnohorivka is now under Russian control since there are many reports of them attacking towards Stepova over there, or Stepova. So that is what's happening in the north, and down the south. There have been apparently repelled attacks in all the usual places: Pervomaisky, Vodyane, Opitny. I'm going to just take you back to, well, first of all, what does Rybar, pro-Russian source say, south of Avdiivka, Russian troops continue to storm enemy positions on heights near Vodyane. The defending Ukrainian forces are suffering heavy losses. The most bloodless units are allocated for replacement in Severny. I don't know what that means. And possibly the units that haven't taken the biggest hits are due to be used as replacements in Severny. Just to let you know that Severny is here. But what's interesting is that's what Rebus says as a pro-Russian source, and that's all quite positive for the Russians there. But when you go to look at what Wargonzo says, and producing maps to kind of back up these claims, or at least illustrate these claims. Wargonzo says on the Donetsk front, Russian troops are conducting assault operations on the northern outskirts of Mariinka. Okay, at Novelsky, there were oncoming battles. The armed forces of the Russian Federation again tried to advance to Pervomaisky and Severny. No success. With the support of artillery, they attacked the fortified area of the armed forces of Ukraine in Avdiivka from the south. To the north, similar actions near Kamyanka and the capture of the village of Krasnohorivka. Russian troops develop an offensive on Stepnoye, which is Stepova. The goal is to take control of the section of the railway line to Avdiivka. The armed forces of the Russian Federation fired on Pobyeda and lists a whole load of other places they fired on. Artillery-wise, but the idea is that they've had no success. This is Wargonzo saying no success particularly around Pervomaisky and towards Severny, whereas Rybar is a lot more positive on the activities there. So kind of marginal disagreements between the Russian sources as to what's going on there, but no. I guess the important thing is no territorial gains here, although Syriac maps didn't seem to do any mapping yesterday, and that's one of my sources for quite good daily changes of mapping in terms of what the Russians are doing. So they might have made gains, but there doesn't seem to be any evidence from some of my usual sources. Now let's go and see what ISW has to say. ISW pretty much confirming all of those previous claims, saying that although the claims of Krasnohorivka being captured are sort of rife among Russian mill bloggers, the ISW has not observed visual confirmation of those claims. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces started an offensive from Krasnohorivka in the direction of Stepova and are attempting to capture a section of local railroad that leads to Avdiivka. So that's one of the objectives, one would think, is this railroad that comes down into Avdiivka between Stepova and Krasnohorivka. Anyway, that's what's going on there. Novelsky down here seeing sort of repelled attacks there, but no particular movement. Same can be said for Mariinka and actually Vuhledar as well. I showed you this video earlier of a Vampire MLRS. So this is a Ukrainian Czech provided Ukrainian MLRS taking a bit of a lancet beating. A loitering munition hit it, and its munitions really went off. There we go, big explosion, but that was in the Avdiivka area. So that will obviously hurt Ukraine's capability in that area to hit the Russian forces with multiply launched rockets. So other than that, yeah, we're onto Mariinka, as I said. All the information we really have, War Gonzo says there's fighting on the northern outskirts of Mariinka, so that's probably representing this area where the Russians have made some small gains over the last couple of weeks. Other than that, I think attacks around Pobyeda. Defamon says repulsive attacks in Kamyanka, Avdiivka, Pervomaysky, Novelska, and Mariinka. And then that's the end. So no real claims about anywhere else, not around Vuhledar. I don't know if there's still activity there. There could well be, but nothing explicit coming out. Indeed, ISW says the ISW has not observed other Russian claims about Ukrainian counterattacks around Vuhledar in recent days. So it's been pretty quiet there too. And this is kind of talks to the idea that the Russians appear to be sort of culminating, or that it's relatively quiet along the front line. And again, we go back to the same old conversations about, is this really the Russian offensive? If this is the Russian offensive, what's going on? And yes, we're getting into spring, and the weather is going to affect movement. There's going to be very muddy roads everywhere, and that will mean it's difficult to maneuver. But then, why pick this time to do an offensive? Okay, well, if that was the offensive and it's been and gone, that's terrible. But if the offensive is still yet to happen, again, the same questions. Where is all your equipment ready for an offensive? So we're seeing heaps and heaps of Ukrainian equipment building up. We're hearing of the Bradleys and the Strikers and the Challengers and all this stuff coming across the borders or getting to Poland, and we're visually seeing this stuff, and we're seeing the training on it. I showed you a video this morning of an entire line of MRAPs, Oshkosh MRAPs with a Wolfhound and a Husky and loads of Humvees. This is capacity. This is capacity for a counterattack or counteroffensive. You're building up your stuff. You're seeing all the indications. Right, this is a counteroffensive. But then when you go back, then we come back to Russia. It's like, okay, have you done your Have you done your offensive? Holy crap, that was really anticlimactic. Okay, if you haven't done it, well, where's all your kit? Where's all this stuff that's lined up ready for an offensive? And I'd just be really interested in what the Russians say. I've had people on my threads laughing, Bakhmut's going to fall, this is it, everything's going to fall just after that dominoes. They're still saying that. Still had that yesterday in my threads. It's like, Bakhmut still hasn't fallen. Holy crap, do you realise how underwhelming the Russian, threats of their the potential success of their army, these threats, how underwhelming they are. It's just, where are you? What are you doing? There is nothing. Yeah, you are making small gains in Bakhmut, but where's all your equipment? You've got some forces. You've got a potential to mobilize a load more men and give them some fairly average equipment and send them to the front line and maybe try and create some problems there. But is that it? Is that all you've got now? And I know that this new offensive from the Ukrainians might not be the be all and end all, as in it will be difficult. They're going to have to fight through a whole load of defenses. It won't be quick going, and they're going to have to do some brilliant combined arms maneuvers, and they're going to have to be communicating and working with logistics and working with the air force and etc. 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 But I just I can see things happening for the Ukrainians positively. And when I look to the Russians, see, well, what positive indications are there that the Russians can do X, Y, and Z? And I see nothing. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then you hear these pro-Russian voices like giving the whole full of it in these threads. You think, are you deluding yourself? Do you really believe what you're saying? I can't see that the Russians have that much to throw at an offensive anymore. It's just, are they just hanging on? Or am I just deluded because that's what I also want to be the case? I don't know. Okay, just to reiterate what I said yesterday about activity in the Zaporizhzhia area. So these kind of reconnaissance in force moves by the Ukrainians south of Kharkiv, south of um, or towards Polihi, and possibly around the Kamyanska area here towards Vasilivka down there. These were all kind of repelled by the Russians, but it's are we seeing activity by the Ukrainians that's ahead of a potential counteroffensive from the Zaporizhzhia direction down towards Tokmat, towards the coast? I don't know, but certainly an uptick of Ukrainian activity around this region. No real news about anything going on in Kherson. There has been apparently less artillery, and this is again feeding into the idea that the Russians are running low on artillery, and most of their artillery has been used up in Bakhmut. This has been a kind of a favored area for the Russians to hit with artillery on a consistent basis over the months, even before the withdrawal. There was a lot of artillery activity around here, towards Mykolaiv, towards Orchakiv, and over the river, and all around here. But that has definitely seen a downtick recently, as artillery usage has apparently across the whole front line. So it's going to be interesting to see. I'm really interested in next week to see what happened in Bakhmut, what will happen up and down the rest of the line, whether we have seen the end of the offensive for the Russians or whether they're going to suddenly push somewhere else. Um, and what the Ukrainians are going to do as we start seeing equipment trickle in. They obviously don't want to overplay their hand, and they need to be super prepared for these counteroffensives. But I'm fairly sure they're going to be trying to keep operational security tight in the whole region because they don't want the Russians to know where they've got huge accumulations of equipment. However, the Russians will find out. There are Orlans, there are drones, there are satellites that will give the Russians an indication. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the Ukrainians deal with that and how they accumulate their equipment in a way that's not dangerous for them going forward. Anyway, that's the end of the Frontline update for today. Hope that was useful. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all the assistance you guys give to the channel, all the support. It's super appreciated. Thank you, and I'll catch you for the Ukraine War update extra video a little bit later.